The last data type that we're going to look at connecting to is Microsoft SQL Server. And this is quite a common database package to be using, both on the web and for small businesses. So it's useful to be able to make the connection to a SQL Server installation. Included in the title are the files needed to actually install SQL Server Express on your machine for you to then practice with SQL Server. So let's have a look at how we would make a connection to a SQL Server database, assuming that it's already installed. So the steps are to open the Database Expert as normal. So if we cancel this to show that it's that icon there. Those are my connections, so I'm going to compress those connections that I've used previously. We'd like to create a new connection, so that's plus. There are two ways really of connecting to SQL Server, and we'll cover both routes. The first of those is OLEDB, so it's Object Linking and Embedding. In the plus, we're then looking for the correct driver for SQL Server, and it's this one here, Microsoft OLEDB provider for SQL Server. Next, what's the server called? Now, sometimes you can pick that from the drop list. Sometimes you would need to type it in. Our particular server is training-pc/training. The user ID to log in and the password to log in. Assuming you have these three elements correct, when we click the drop down for the database, it will list all the databases on that SQL Server, and we can choose, in this case, AdventureWorks LT. And then next. The integrated security refers to SQL Server using Windows security for logging in and out. If that's the case, you can actually place a tick in here, and you'll see that the user ID and password are then grayed out because it will actually use your Windows login information. If your SQL Server does not use integrated security, then you'll need to enter a user ID and password to be able to access the database. Next gives us a summary. Finish makes the connection, and we can then see training-pc/training, so that's the SQL Server. I can see the database I'm connected to, and that expands out into all the objects on that database. So we have a number of owners here. DBO is the main owner. DBO has tables. Sales LT has tables and views, and Sys has a lot of reference tables. Now, depending on your login will depend on what you see here. Because we've actually logged in using the administrator account, we can see everything, which then leads to a little bit more confusion when you're deciding what you're looking for. Ideally, you would log into SQL Server perhaps with Sales LT as your user, and then only see the Sales LT database objects. So that's using the OLEDB, make a new connection. So we chose make a new connection, and the driver is the most important step here. It's this one, Microsoft OLEDB provider for SQL Server. And then next are the login credentials, so the name of the server, user ID and password, and the database. This server could be completely remote in a web location, in which case you would need its remote address, which highly likely is going to be its IP address. So we'll cancel that because we've already created the connection. Now the second way of connecting through to SQL Server is for some nice person in your IT department to actually set up a Windows DSN, so a Windows data source name, which needs setting up on your machine through your control panel. And what that does is it speeds up the amount of information you have to provide to make a connection. If a DSN exists, then we can use a slightly different route. From the create new connection, we come down to ODBC, Open Database Connectivity, plus these are the data source names that exist on this machine. So we were to choose CR test. And next, the only information we now need to provide is the password. The name of the SQL Server has already been set up inside this DSN, so we don't need to know that. We just need to log in. The default database has already been decided by the DSN as well. We simply need to provide a valid password. And finish. And you'll find we get to see exactly the same as we do here because we're connected to the same place. So it's the same for schemas that can then expand out into the same objects. But that's a lot quicker, requires knowing a lot less information about the actual SQL Server installation because some nice IT person has actually set up a Windows DSN on your machine already, and this will be done through your control panel and the administrative tools. Either way, we're connected to the same location. So that's making the connection to a SQL Server installation. That installation could be on your machine, on your network, or out in the big world on the internet.